Imagine waking up tomorrow and the dollar doesn't just float. It stands firm, anchored to something real, gold. Not digital trust, not policy maneuvers, but a weight you can hold. This isn't fantasy. It's a question worth asking. Today, imagine being in a room where the air feels heavy, where decisions being made today echo into generations ahead. That's the kind of urgency the future demands when we talk about the dollar and gold. This is not a theoretical question, not a far-off academic exercise, but a pressing challenge sitting right in front of us, because the choices made about money, value, and trust ripple into every single household, every business, and every dream that relies on stability. And if we don't confront this now, we risk watching the very foundation of economic freedom fracture under our feet. The reality is simple. Money is power, money is influence, and money is trust. For decades, the U.S. dollar has been the backbone of the global economy, not because it's always stable, but because the world believed in it. Confidence, not gold, became the anchor, and confidence works, until the cracks begin to show. We've already seen what happens when inflation bites, when debt levels surge, when printing presses don't stop. The promise of value starts to blur. The question then becomes, how long can a currency float on nothing more than faith before it needs something real to hold it up? Gold for centuries has represented more than just wealth. It has represented permanence. It can't be created by a central bank. It doesn't bend to political cycles, and it doesn't vanish in a market crash. It sits there, immutable, carrying with it the weight of history and the clarity of truth. To ask if the dollar could be tied back to gold is to ask whether we are ready to return to discipline, to anchor value not in promises but in proof. That's the urgency of this conversation. It's not nostalgia for the past, it's recognition that the future built on instability is no future at all. What makes this moment different is scale. We're not living in an isolated economy anymore. Every fluctuation in the dollar sends shockwaves through global trade, through emerging markets, through entire systems, and every nation is watching. Some are stacking gold reserves quietly, preparing for the day when trust in fiat alone might not hold. Others are experimenting with digital assets, hedging against the dominance of the dollar. This is no longer an American conversation. This is a global reality. To ignore it is to gamble with more than money. It's to gamble with trust, with credibility, with the very backbone of international exchange. Urgency doesn't mean panic. Urgency means clarity. It means seeing what is at stake and refusing to delay the discussion. Vision comes from asking bold questions, the kind most people shy away from because the answers might challenge the status quo. Could a gold-backed model bring stability again? Could it impose the discipline needed to restrain reckless spending, to restore credibility, to anchor a system drifting further into abstraction? These questions are not just for policymakers. They are for every citizen, every entrepreneur, every investor who understands that money is not just numbers on a screen. It is the operating system of our lives. The vision must go beyond longing for a golden past. It must confront the reality of a digitized world where speed, transparency, and adaptability matter as much as stability. Perhaps the future is not a full return to gold, but a hybrid model, a balance where trust is not left floating, but grounded in tangible value. Vision means not waiting until collapse forces the change, but shaping the shift before the cracks become catastrophic. This is where courage comes in. It's easy to ride the wave of what exists, to believe that because the dollar still dominates, it always will. But history shows us that every empire, every system, every currency that lost discipline eventually lost dominance. The question is not whether change will come, but who will lead it, who will demand it, and who will refuse to accept a system built only on promises. Urgency says, the time is now. Vision says, the future can be better. And when those two forces combine, movements happen. So let this not just be an intellectual debate, but a spark, a reminder that stability, credibility, and discipline are not luxuries, they are necessities. If we carry that vision forward, if we demand real answers, we will not only reshape the future of the dollar, but the future of global trust itself. The problem begins with something so invisible, so subtle, that most people don't even notice it until it hits their wallets. Money today isn't anchored to anything tangible. It floats on policy, on central bank decisions, on the faith that governments can always print more when things get tough. For years, this worked because people believed it would always work. But belief is fragile. Once confidence cracks, the illusion of stability shatters, and what seemed permanent suddenly feels paper thin. That's the true danger. Our system depends not on discipline, but on hope. Look at where we stand today. Debt levels in the U.S. are at historic highs, and deficits are no longer just temporary. They've become structural. Trillions are borrowed with no concrete plan for repayment, only the expectation that growth or more borrowing will patch the hole. Inflation has reminded us that even the most powerful currency isn't immune to erosion. Every time the cost of living rises faster than wages, every time savings lose purchasing power, it's a signal that the system isn't as unshakable as we'd like to believe. That's the problem defined. The dollar's strength relies on confidence, and confidence alone is not a strong foundation. The stakes are global, not local. The dollar isn't just America's currency, it's the world's reserve. That means trade, investments, and entire economies rest on its shoulders. When the dollar weakens, emerging markets feel the pain first, but eventually the ripple reaches everywhere. If trust in the dollar falters, alternatives will rise, whether that's gold, digital assets, or another nation's currency. And once momentum shifts away, it rarely swings back. The stakes aren't simply about inflation or debt. They're about global leadership, influence, and power. To understand what's at risk, look at history. When currencies lose credibility, people abandon them. Think of the German mark during hyperinflation, or more recently Venezuela's bolivar. These are extreme examples, but they highlight a universal truth. When people lose faith in their money, they find another store of value, whether that's gold, real estate, or foreign currencies. The U.S. is not Venezuela, but the principle is the same. Depend too long on promises without backing, and trust erodes. That erosion may not come overnight. It's a slow leak, but slow leaks eventually sink ships. The stakes extend beyond economics. They shape society. A currency people can't rely on breeds inequality, division, and unrest. The wealthy find ways to hedge against volatility, while the average person bears the brunt of rising prices and falling purchasing power. That disparity widens trust gaps not just in money, but in institutions, and when institutions lose credibility, societies fracture. This isn't just a monetary issue, it's a stability issue at every level, social, political, and cultural. The other side of the problem is complacency. Because the dollar still dominates, many assume it always will. They underestimate the speed with which shifts can occur. Empires don't fall overnight, but when decline sets in, it often accelerates faster than anyone expects. Rome's currency was once trusted across continents until devaluation eroded its worth. Britain's pound sterling was once the global reserve until debt, wars, and structural weakness shifted the crown to the dollar. History doesn't repeat itself in exact detail, but it rhymes loudly enough for anyone paying attention to hear. So what exactly is at stake? It's not just whether the dollar stays strong, but whether the global economy remains anchored in something people trust. It's whether the U.S. retains the ability to project influence through its currency, or whether that influence is diluted by alternatives. It's whether ordinary people can trust that their savings, their pensions, their investments will actually hold value over decades. And most importantly, it's whether we choose to act with discipline now or wait for crisis to force a solution later. The truth is, No system can thrive indefinitely without accountability. Detaching the dollar from gold gave flexibility, yes, but it also removed guardrails. Without guardrails, it's tempting to keep pushing further, borrowing more, spending more, inflating more. The problem is that there's always a breaking point. The stakes are whether we meet that point prepared and proactive, or blindsided and reactive. The problem is not abstract, it's urgent. The stakes are not minor, they are existential. At its core, this is about whether money remains a tool of trust or becomes a symbol of fragility. And the answer will define not just economies, but the trajectory of nations. The past tells us a story of discipline, of limits, of clarity. There was a time when every dollar was more than paper. It was a promise tied to something real, something you could hold in your hand, something no government could simply conjure out of thin air. Gold was not just metal, it was truth in physical form. That link between paper and gold forced leaders to think twice, to balance ambition with restraint. Printing more money meant securing more reserves. Borrowing recklessly wasn't an option because the weight of gold refused to bend to politics. The past was not perfect, but it was anchored. Everyone knew what the dollar represented, a claim on value that could not be inflated away by decree. The shift away from gold came with reasons. The world was changing fast, wars had drained resources, economies needed flexibility, and growth demanded liquidity that gold's rigidity could not always provide. Detaching the dollar from gold was framed as a liberation, a way to unlock potential and respond swiftly to crises. And in many ways it did just that. Governments gained freedom, central banks had new tools, economic shocks could be cushioned with stimulus and intervention. For a while it felt like progress, like money itself had evolved to meet the complexity of the modern age. But the freedom of the present carries a hidden cost. Without the discipline of gold, the dollar became untethered. Policy replaced principle, confidence replaced clarity, and once money floats without an anchor, temptation grows. The temptation to overspend, to overborrow, to overpromise. Each generation has pushed the limits further, believing that as long as the world trusts the dollar, the system can stretch infinitely. The past was about constraint. The present is about expansion. But expansion without boundaries always leads to fragility. Now imagine the future. Picture two paths. On the first path, we continue as we are floating further into abstraction, leaning harder on debt, trusting that faith in the dollar will endure forever. That future may feel comfortable now, but comfort is deceptive. At some point, the cracks widen, inflation accelerates, alternatives strengthen. Other nations build systems to bypass the dollar, slowly draining its dominance. On that path, the dollar doesn't collapse in a dramatic explosion, it withers, losing influence piece by piece until it is no longer the anchor of the global system. That is a future shaped by denial, by assuming yesterday's dominance guarantees tomorrow's relevance. On the second path, we look back to move forward. We don't copy the past exactly, but we learn from it. We recognize that discipline matters, that clarity matters, that value must be grounded in something more than promises. Maybe it's gold, maybe it's a hybrid model that combines the permanence of reserves with the adaptability of digital systems. The form may differ, but the principle is the same. Money must be more than faith, it must be tied to truth. That future does not mean abandoning innovation. It means pairing innovation with integrity. It means creating a system that can flex in times of crisis, but still stand firm when trust is tested. The contrast between past and future is not about nostalgia. It's about vision. The past shows us what happens when money is anchored. The present shows us what happens when it is not. The future asks us to choose which lesson we will carry forward. Will we accept endless expansion and the fragility it breeds, or will we demand a foundation that cannot be printed away? That is the choice ahead. The irony is that many dismiss the past as outdated, yet the very problems we face now, debt, inflation, instability, are symptoms of forgetting its lessons. The gold standard was abandoned because it felt restrictive. But maybe those restrictions were not a weakness. They were the guardrails that kept excess in check. Without them, the road feels open, but it's also dangerous. The future demands that we decide whether we want a road without guardrails or a path that, though narrower, leads to stability. The past speaks of restraint, the present reveals fragility, and the future requires courage. If we have the courage to blend the permanence of the past with the possibilities of tomorrow, we can build something stronger than either alone. That is the contrast, not old versus new, but fragile versus resilient. The future will not wait for us to decide. It is already being shaped by those who cling to the past blindly and by those who deny it altogether. The real power lies with those who can see both clearly and chart a path that honors discipline while embracing innovation. There's a trap that too many leaders fall into. They want to sell certainty. They want to hand out promises like candy, assuring people that the future will unfold exactly as they predict. But the truth is, nobody knows with absolute certainty if the dollar will be tied back to gold again. Nobody can stand on a stage and declare that as destiny. What we can do, what we must do, is embrace the exploration, because exploration is where real progress begins, not in guaranteeing an outcome, but in daring to ask the questions others avoid. Exploration is uncomfortable. It forces us to examine assumptions, to shine a light on the weak spots in the system, to admit that the story we've been told about endless stability may not hold. And yet, without that discomfort, nothing changes. Exploration is not about nostalgia for some golden era, nor about romanticizing discipline for its own sake. It's about asking, what would it mean for money to be grounded again in something undeniable? What would it mean for global trust if the dollar carried not just the weight of policy, but the weight of truth? The point is not to promise a return to gold, but to explore what a goal-linked future could look like in today's world. Could it be partial? Could it be hybridized with digital assets? Could it coexist with flexible monetary tools while still reintroducing a layer of accountability? These are not easy questions, and that's exactly why they matter. Promises oversimplify. Exploration reveals possibilities. The deeper we explore, the more prepared we are for whatever path the future takes. When you choose exploration over promise, you empower people to think for themselves. A promise tells them what to expect, but exploration invites them into the process. It says, let's look at the data together, let's weigh the risks and the rewards, let's imagine not just one future, but several. And in that collective imagination lies the real power, because a nation, a market, a society that explores boldly will always outpace one that clings blindly to promises. Consider the alternative. If we refuse to explore, if we dismiss the question outright, we stay trapped in a dangerous kind of complacency. We assume the current system can stretch forever, that confidence will never waver, that debt will never reach a breaking point. That is not vision, that is denial. Exploration acknowledges reality, even if it's uncomfortable. It says, we may not have the answers yet, but we're not afraid to ask. That mindset alone separates leaders from followers, builders from dreamers. Exploration also matters because the stakes are not just economic, they are generational. The choices made about money today shape not just markets, but the lives of children not yet born. When future generations look back, they will ask, did we cling to false promises, or did we have the courage to explore better systems? That legacy won't be defined by certainty. It will be defined by curiosity, by the willingness to search for integrity when it would have been easier to stay silent. And make no mistake, exploration doesn't weaken confidence. It strengthens it. People don't lose faith when leaders admit uncertainty. They lose faith when leaders pretend to have answers and are proven wrong. Exploration builds trust because it says, We're not here to manipulate you with guarantees. We're here to walk with you into the unknown and figure it out together. That's leadership. That's integrity. So when we ask, will we see the U.S. dollar backed by gold again? The power is not in predicting a yes or a no. The power is in daring to ask the question in the first place, in refusing to treat money as untouchable dogma, in exploring openly what a more resilient future might require. This is not a promise of gold. It's an invitation to think bigger, to demand accountability, to challenge the status quo. Exploration is where innovation starts. Every breakthrough, every shift, every revolution began not with certainty, but with a question. This one about money, trust, and stability is no different. By choosing to explore, we don't just wait for the future to happen to us, we shape it. And in that choice lies the possibility of building a system that doesn't just serve today, but endures for tomorrow. You can listen to debates about gold, fiat currency, or global markets all day long, but here's the truth that most overlook. None of it matters if the people listening, the ones living it, don't see themselves as part of the equation. Too often, conversations about money are framed as if they belong only to central banks, policymakers, or economists in ivory towers. But that's a lie. The future of money belongs to everyone who earns it, spends it, saves it, invests it, and depends on it. That means the future belongs to you. Empowerment begins the moment you realize this isn't someone else's conversation. It's yours. Every time you feel the bite of inflation in your grocery bill, every time your savings lose purchasing power, every time your paycheck doesn't stretch as far as it did a year ago, you are living inside the decisions being made about currency. That's not theory, that's reality. And because you live it, your voice in shaping the dialogue matters more than you've been told. Empowerment starts when you stop seeing money as something too complex for you to understand and start seeing it as the operating system of your life, one that you have every right to question and influence. The old narrative has always been, leave it to the experts, trust the system, don't ask too many questions, but history is clear. Systems that avoid scrutiny eventually collapse under their own weight. Change comes when everyday people begin to ask the uncomfortable questions, when they demand better, when they refuse to be lulled into complacency. Empowerment means not waiting for a crisis to wake you up, but stepping forward now, while the system still has the chance to be reshaped by vision instead of panic. Empowering yourself doesn't require you to have all the answers. It doesn't mean you need to predict exactly what will happen with the dollar, gold, or global markets. What it requires is curiosity, the willingness to ask, is this sustainable? Who benefits from the system as it is, and who pays the price? What alternatives exist, and what would they mean for me, my family, my community? Those questions don't just belong to professors or traders. They belong to you, because you are the one living with the outcomes. When you begin to think like that, you stop being a passive participant and start becoming an active player, and active players shape futures. Empowerment comes from realizing that your attention, your questions, your voice multiplied by millions, creates pressure that no institution can ignore. If enough people demand transparency, discipline, and accountability in how money is managed, then change is no longer a distant possibility. It becomes an inevitable outcome. The reason most people never feel empowered in this space is because they underestimate their leverage. They believe one person can't make a difference, but one person questioning, one person speaking up, one person educating others has always been how movements start. Empowerment doesn't come from waiting until you have a megaphone. It comes from using whatever voice you have today, knowing that courage compounds. Empowerment also means shifting how you see your own role in the economy. You are not just a consumer or a saver. You are an investor in the future. Every choice you make with your money sends a signal. What you choose to store value in, what you demand from your leaders, what questions you raise about monetary integrity, these are acts of influence. They may feel small individually, but together they shape the culture of accountability. And culture, more than any single policy, determines the direction of systems. Most importantly, empowerment is contagious. When you begin to see yourself as part of this story, others will too. And that ripple effect transforms doubt into dialogue, dialogue into momentum, and momentum into change. Empowerment isn't about waiting for someone else to hand you control. It's about realizing you already have it and using it. So here's the challenge. Don't listen to these debates as if you're an outsider. Step into them as a participant. Ask the questions. Share the insights. Refuse to accept blind faith as the price of stability. Empowerment means understanding that while you may not control the system alone, the system cannot ignore millions of empowered voices rising together. And when that happens, when curiosity turns into collective courage, no policy, no institution, no old narrative can withstand it. That's what it means to be empowered, to recognize that the question, will the dollar ever be backed by gold again, isn't just a headline, it's an invitation. An invitation for you to think bigger, to demand better, and to step into the role of shaping the future instead of waiting to be shaped by it. So here's the real question. Not will it happen, but what if we demand it? What if we refuse to accept faith without structure? What if we reclaim currency as a tool of confidence, not confusion? My invitation to you, stay curious, stay relentless. Because every great shift began with one question. And now you're thinking it.